Namaste and welcome to the Bharatvaarta Weekly. I'm Roshan Karyappa. We have a guest with us today, Abhishek Paul, Nirav Kanodra, and Prasanna Vishwanathan, who's returning to us to the weekly after a long hiatus. Hi, everyone. Hope all of you are really good and excited about the weekly today. We have a bunch of things that we want to cover. Prime Minister Modi is on a three-nation trip to Europe. The RBI hiked rates last week, which wiped out 12 lakh crore from the market. The health ministry had an interesting response to the WHO's excess death report. And then in other news, Delhi BJP leader Tajinder Bagga was arrested and perhaps released afterwards. Not sure about that. And then there was the case of the Indian envoy's response to the Dutch ambassador on Twitter. So we have plenty to cover today. With that, let's get started. We also put out an interesting episode on the India-UK relations last week. Of course, Nirav, myself, spoke to Sunil Sharma of the CFOC. Very comprehensive discussion on plenty of aspects on trade, economy, political relations, geopolitical relations, and so on and so forth. Do check it out. It's a fascinating episode. With that, moving on to the first piece of news. Over the last week, Prime Minister Modi made visits to Germany, France, and Denmark. The main purpose of the tour was to hold a series of bilateral meetings to boost ties in a range of areas, including trade, energy, and green technology. In Germany, he met with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and discussed key areas of bilateral cooperation under the overall strategic partnership. In Denmark, the Prime Minister met Frederiksen and spoke on post-pandemic economic recovery, climate change, renewable energy, and the evolving global security scenario. In France, he held a talk with President Emmanuel Macron on issues of bilateral and mutual interests, as well as regional and global developments. Abhishek, it's an interesting time to visit Europe, isn't it? So what do you make of the significance of these visits?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people, given India's neutrality in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, a lot of people had been commenting that this could lead to worsening of ties of India with the West, including US and various European countries. But the various diplomatic visits, both to India and by Prime Minister Modi or Foreign Minister Jaishankar to various countries, kind of shows that no such thing has at least happened prima facie, right? So we had Boris Johnson visiting India, we had the EU head visiting India, and then we had this trip by Prime Minister Modi to various European countries. So clearly, all that speculation was not warranted. So what has happened, or what is emerging from these meetings, is that these countries are getting a better appreciation and understanding of India's position vis-a-vis the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Also, I think several countries are also looking at it as an opportunity to get India closer, especially on things like defense, right? Where I think it is, if you are sort of looking at it in an objective manner, it is both facts are true, like that India has a very big dependency on Russian arms. At the same time, over time, the dependency has been reducing. So the trajectory is also clear that India is looking to diversify as much as possible. And so this is also an opportunity for countries like, let's say, France, with whom we have good defense cooperation, to, take it to the next level as well. So that trend is also continuing in these visits. Also, of course, India is now seriously considering and working on various free trade agreements. Like we've concluded one with the UAE and Australia. We are working very seriously with the one with Britain. And also the one with EU is also on the horizon. And tentative timeline is like next year, right, for that one. So on all these fronts, there is some good traction between India and these European countries. Another, topic which is probably very near and dear to the hearts of some of these countries, which or leaders of some of these countries, which Prime Minister Modi met. That is the Scandinavian countries, is of course climate change and green energy and all that. And to be fair, India has always also shown its willingness, right, to move to these green sources of energy, right? And so that is also one more area of good cooperation that is possible, with Europe. So all in all, I thought it was a good short trip with some of the key European countries, right? And yeah, I'm curiously looking at how things develop on the defense front and the FTA front.
Yeah. No, I think it was a very warm welcome as well, especially in Denmark, where the Prime Minister had, was met at the airport itself, right? Yeah. So very interesting. Moving ahead. A hike in the repo rates by the RBI saw rupees 12 lakh crore wiped out from the equity markets last week. In an unscheduled policy announcement, RBI Governor Mr. Shaktikanta Das pronounced the repo rate increase by 40 basis points to 4.4%, a first since August 2018. Besides, Mr. Das also increased CRR, or cash reserve ratio, by 50 basis points to 4.5% in a bid to suck liquidity out of the system. Several stocks swung widely as investors assessed the impact of aggressive tightening of monetary policy on economic growth and corporate earnings. Both the Sensex and Nifty had posted their worst fall in 2 months on Tuesday after RBI's surprise announcement. Nirav, well, this was long expected that the low interest rates party would soon end. But would you say right now is a timely measure for us to curb inflation, and how should people respond to this? Hey, you're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, hi. So I think basically you have to go back to like pre-COVID. And so during COVID, everybody cut rates, right? So India also cut rates. The central bank has to kind of balance between growth and inflation. The focus was that revive growth whichever way is possible. So that was the right thing to do at that time. And now what you're seeing is, it's not just India, by the way. So the US Federal Reserve hiked by 50 basis points last week. Reserve Bank of Australia hiked by 25 basis points. Bank of England hiked, right? So everywhere, the kind of easy money, low interest policy that you had kept was appropriate at one point of time, and now you have to slowly exit it. So I think this was, because it was an unscheduled meeting, it was just the day before or like earlier in the day, whereas US FOMC was later that night, that this was a surprise. But I think this is now kind of market should expect it. And you will see that obviously for companies, the cost of borrowing goes up a bit, or if you're just using a discounted cash flow model, the future cash flows. So very high growth stocks is a little bit more negative for it. For, I would say, consumer durables or consumer staple kind of stocks, they have the pricing power also to pass on inflation to the customers. They will be less affected. So yes, as in these things, cycles come and go. All central banks globally are now worried more about inflation, and all politicians are worried about inflation, right? And this is a global phenomenon. You had supply chain disruptions due to COVID, and now China is still not exited out of COVID. You've had higher oil prices even before the Russia war, and disruption on food as well because of Ukraine not being able to supply food to Europe. So I think there are quite a few things. So all central banks are focusing more on inflation instead of growth, and you should see some more rate hikes. So see, you have to look at the things in a balanced way. So it's good for savers. I think the FD rates will go up. So this is just first of many hikes. It's bad if you have like a floating rate mortgage or you're heavily indebted. But all the windfall that you had in the last 2 years was expected to be temporary. So that's what it is. I think RBI overall has done quite a good job of managing through the whole pandemic. And even now, it is appropriate. Maybe they should have been done in a scheduled meeting in May itself. And just wanted to highlight, like last week you all spoke about GST collections are strong. Our export numbers are the highest ever. Our all growth indicators are reasonably strong. So it's not as if these few rate hikes are going to derail anything, right? It is just that your focal point of worry is more inflation, which if it goes over 7-8%, that's eating into everyone's savings. So this is a prudent measure. And yeah, I think you will keep seeing a rate hike every 2 months, every scheduled meeting for a few meetings at least. So that's the same globally as well. So that's about it.
Yeah. And these are exceptional times, right? I mean, we're coming off of a pandemic. There's a war going on in Europe with perhaps the biggest commodity exporting nation in the world, right? Oil prices are high. I mean, and Nirav, so what do you make of this thing that, we're headed towards stagflation, right? I mean, low growth, high inflation, high unemployment, and a bunch of other, bad things happening all together.
I think, see, there is like, it's quite different for all, like you would say, like the big blocks, if you look at it. So for US, it's very different because in the US, it's net oil, it's flat on oil because it's an oil producer and the largest consumer, right? So, and it has very low unemployment right now, right? But very high inflation. In US, the inflation is 8.5%, is more than India, right? So US is kind of okay. Europe is a bit hit because of very high energy costs, especially natural gas, and with sanctions on Russia and Ukraine not being able to produce food, those kind of things are hitting Europe quite badly, where the growth is bad. US growth is still strong. Then you look at like the other block, which is like China. So China is still stuck. They're not getting out of COVID. They have a dynamic zero policy. So their inflation is not a problem, but growth is a problem because everything is shut, services are shut. So India is somewhere in between. So India growth has been reasonably good. I think employment is all coming back. Anecdotally, India does not have very good employment data, but anecdotally, you can see that all the people, migrant workers who went back to their villages have come back to the cities. You are seeing, so one way to measure is how much is the NREGA, so how much is the NREGA outlay? So that has actually decreased after the pandemic. So that's a positive sign. Your GST collection is a very timely monthly number. So that is doing well. That is a positive sign, but that's the formal part of the economy, right? And inflation, which we measure and it comes out every month, that has crossed 7%. So I think that's a worrying sign. So I think India will have issues of higher energy prices, but food, India doesn't import much. Only palm oil from Indonesia and Malaysia. And Indonesia again has put a ban on it. So maybe India grows. So I think India needs to move out of agriculture from growing too much cereal and maybe a little more like groundnuts or sunflower seeds or whatever to rebalance, right? So that, but India, bulk of the food is all domestically grown, and that is also like a lot of it is via PDS channels. So there's not high inflation there. So I think India is reasonably, what you would call it is cushioned, right? So growth is going to be there. India does not have the big growth problem. So that's a positive. It has an inflation problem right now. And hopefully with greater manufacturing push, more PLIs, so existing PLIs delivering, and us increasing exports, which generates a little more employment, I don't think employment or growth is an issue. It's just so what RBI has done is appropriate to tackle inflation. So yeah, that's what it is.
Right. All right, moving on. Last night, a Punjab court issued an arrest warrant against BJP leader Tajinder Bagga. Bharatiya Janata Yuva Morcha National Secretary Tajinder Pal Singh Bagga was arrested in Delhi on charges of making provocative statements, promoting enmity and criminal intimidation. The case was registered on the complaint of AAP leader Sunny Singh Ahluwalia. Tajinder Bagga's arrest then sparked a political slugfest between the BJP and AAP, with BJP claiming AAP abducted its leader through the state police. The AAP rejected the charge and said the BJP leader was arrested for allegedly stoking communal tensions in Punjab. Prasanna, we have spoken about Punjab specifically before, but what do you make of this. There's also a question on chat where Hemang Palan has asked, we're seeing continuous abuse of power and police in Bengal, Maharashtra, and now Punjab. What is the way out of this?
I think, basically, one of the reasons, I think, when we talk about, say, assault on freedom of expression or authoritarian tendencies, right? I think this entire narrative, which is very well politically motivated, I think it kind of focuses on the center, right? But if you really look at the authoritarianism and this kind of, unabashed use of state power, it's really rampant in the state level, actually. Some of the most leaders who prove no criticism and who can kind of, use the state power to harass their opponents. It's a very state-level phenomenon in India, which unfortunately, either the section of the Delhi-based media or the intellectuals, they don't have the honesty to examine this. So, it's very easy to kind of focus all your attention because a government that is ruling in this sector doesn't fit into your political ideology. You just look at Tajinder Bagga, will come to him. Just look at what Rajasthan government is doing for the ZTV journalists, right? And I think there are also court intervention is kind of prevented the arrest, right? And in Tamil Nadu, right, they actually a very popular YouTuber Maridas and also another kind of a popular political analyst Kishore Keswani, they were all harassed with Gundas Act. That's where you kind of almost like a non-bailable offense where the draconian provisions of the Gundas Act, they were all arrested. West Bengal, again, we have discussed enough. It's just not like arresting your political opponents, it's outright brutal killing of people who are opposed to your political ideology. That's a particular state where even the Panchayat elections have such levels of brutal, bloody violence, right? Actually, and virtually there is no separation between the state and the society and the political party that rules the state, right? So this being the thing, and coming to Bagga, Bagga is like a very energetic young leader, right? And he's been in the forefront of, the Delhi politics, so as to speak. Of course, he kind of started off in a very, let's say, in a very controversial fashion. You remember that Prashant Bhushan incident, and later then I think he eventually outgrew those fringes from where he essentially emerged, and then he's kind of a mainstream politician in his own right. And I think this is basically Kejriwal so far, right? Despite his this is what his second term in Delhi. He doesn't have a functional police force under him, right? Because of the Delhi's complex governance structure, the Delhi police largely reports into the Home Ministry and the center. So this is the first time where I think they have a police force, so as to speak, at their beck and call. And so, first opportunity where I think it was like a par for the course kind of a criticism that political opponents hurl at each other. It was like nothing out of the ordinary that Bagga would have ever told. Right? I think the kind of criticism that is directed against prime ministers and other chief ministers are much more, vicious, right? But I think Kejriwal hides authoritarian streak under a certain kind of sophistication, and I think given this was his first opportunity to unleash the police force, and he didn't. And this is after all the grandstanding about how AAP is a very different political force and all that. Basically, he didn't have the power, and you judge the politician by the way they use the power when they have access to the power, right? And it's so evident that they couldn't even wait for a month and did that, and the entire spectacle of three police forces jousting with each other, and of course, I think like it clearly seems to be the case that BJP valued someone like Tajinder Bagga, right? Like you had the Haryana police intervening in Kurukshetra, and then there was an abduction case filed. It was quite a sad spectacle, right? Like in the sense that state police forces are all bound by certain protocol and they need to follow a certain procedure. But I think this just like a signaling by Kejriwal that I too have a police force now, right? Like, there's this like Tamil movie featuring Vadivel, who's typically a lot of terrific comedian, okay, and he's also potentially a major source of memes, right? Like where he says that I'm too like a good, I too can show force and all that stuff. So it's that kind of an action by Kejriwal that I have also arrived with a police force in the scene. So don't take me lightly anymore, actually, because till now maybe I was playing second fiddle in Delhi, but now be careful and watch out, and I will arrest anyone who's going to see anything remotely critical of him. So it's okay in a way. You can say that all politics at one level is also a good expression of power. So I think all of us, like despite all his holier than thou sanctimony and all that, Kejriwal himself is no different from the rest of the political class, right? Actually, maybe there are some true believers, but basically, I think it's good that in a way, they managed to kind of, though like you mentioned, I think they have not really stopped, right? I think the proceeding is still through that thing, and though it's quite gladdening that we had a midnight hearing for a BJP youth activist, that's a special treatment usually reserved for the five-star activist on the PLA. Surprisingly, the court kind of gave a stay order on his arrest till May 10th and all that. In a way, net, to summarize, it's good in the sense that, like if people had any pretensions that Kejriwal is like one grassroots politician who respects the democratic norms and because he came through a certain movement and all that, I think then people can now see for themselves, it's essentially the nature of the politics in the country, like so, bad optics for her, but I think like basically maybe from Kejriwal's perspective has calculated that, just being seen as a tiny political force, urban political force in Delhi. Now he also wants to demonstrate raw power and maybe as a part of their geographical expansion strategy, where they seem to be kind of hoping that Gujarat and Himachal would be a good bet for them. I think this is basically a signaling. That's what I would think.
Right. The WHO's excess deaths report has triggered a response from the health ministry. The WHO study discredits India's official COVID death toll of 4.8 lakh and reports that by their calculation, India's toll is closer to 47 lakhs. Right. And India is objected to the sourcing of data, methodology of collecting the data and the mathematical model used for arriving at the final figures that have been released. According to a circular by the health ministry, India has been consistently objecting to the methodology adopted by the WHO to project excess mortality estimates based on mathematical models. Despite this, WHO released the estimate without adequately addressing these concerns. Abhishek, we've seen, especially over the last couple of years, that COVID has seriously dented the credibility of the WHO. Right? Should we even take this report very seriously?
So, it depends on what your objective is. Like, if you want to criticize the government, I'm sure you will take it seriously. But so I was just looking at some of the numbers by this report. So interestingly, if you go by the numbers from this report and compare it to, so what these guys are saying is like 4.74 million deaths have been undercounted. So like the total death count is about 5.2, 5.3 million for India. So I was looking at the numbers for the US, right? So US, they have said about 900K odd deaths undercounted by 2021, which takes, let's say, their tally to 2 million, right? So even if we believe their numbers, in that case, still at a per capita basis, India's deaths are lower than the COVID deaths in US. So I think these guys have done some very high level estimates looking at the income level of a country. And so if you're a poor country, they have assumed that you will be undercounting much more, right? And obviously among the poorer countries, India is by far the biggest country, right? So obviously the maximum number of excess deaths that they have sort of put is on India. So at a per capita basis, it doesn't look actually that bad, but just given the size and scale of India, and also the fact that no similar comparable numbers come out for China, right? For whatever reason, whether they believe the Chinese numbers or they are scared of China, I don't know. But so basically what ends up happening is that India's outlier deaths look really big and compared to any other country at an absolute basis.
Yeah.
So I think my view is that, look, obviously during pandemics, some amount of statistical undercounting does happen. And I'm also sure that some similar things would have happened in India. Now the question is whether it is 10x like this report suggests, or I think there was one published in Lancet which was putting it at about 6 or 7x. Or I think there are various other people who have estimated a more moderate scale of 2 to 3x. With what would have happened is probably the maximum undercounting might have happened during the peak of the second wave, right, in April, May of 2021. But it's unfair to assume that the system was totally broken down for the all of 1.5, 2 years, right? So even if you assume that, let's say, we undercounted a lot of deaths in the peak of the mayhem, right, in April, May, it is not necessary that such scale of undercounting was happening in the less virulent months, right? So probably a 2 to 3x sort of undercounting is something which I feel is like more logical to look at. I think a lot of states have opened up, helplines for people to raise claims, for the family members who have died, so that they get whatever is the state sanctioned compensation for a COVID death. And I think I read some reports where in some states the number of claims admitted by some of the state governments is higher than the official reported deaths. So I think and that's fine. Like what is a COVID death itself was subject of big debate and dispute among various people. Like so because it could be indirect things, right? Like with the health machinery overstretched, you could have someone with a different ailment, right, who unfortunately did not receive treatment on time and so on. So and there's no doubt that within India itself there was a big discrepancy in various states using different logics. So obviously throughout the world, you can imagine, we have no idea, right, which government was using which logic to count COVID deaths. I think one of the things used by the health ministry is the 2020 civil death registration report, which has come out, which kind of says we had about 470 odd K of excess deaths in that year, 2020 versus the previous year, which is like a 6% increase. And obviously, all of such deaths increase cannot be attributed to COVID, right? Because there is a normal secular trend of increasing population leading to increasing mortality, right? So the 2021 report will be interesting whenever that comes out. And will probably give us a somewhat better picture than whatever is coming out of some of these extrapolation models.
I mean, I personally feel, when data fails us, I think you have to rely on anecdotes. And anecdotally, I mean, 50 lakh people, dying, right? It would have resulted in, mass chaos, right? I mean, definitely. And this data that we've arrived at is also a triangulation of plenty of things, right? The compensation data and so on. And that being off by 10x means that there are plenty of other things that are off then in that case, right?
If you think from people like WHO, I think their intention is almost to sort of highlight that, look, your country's health infrastructure is very bad, your country's whatever, like various systems and policies and health services all are very bad. I think that's the whole intention behind. So even if, let's say, we take benign intentions from their part, I think someone like WHO's, even if it's good intentions, it's like to sort of highlight and say that, look, you need to really improve your health infrastructure to, improve health outcomes, right? Like that's the best way of, if I were to give them, good intentions. Of course, one other way of looking at it is to sort of show that some of the other countries whose official tallies are much worse, right? So give them some way out, right? Like these other poorer countries did, much worse actually. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it depends on how you look at it. But yeah, I think the 50 lakh number doesn't really pass the smell test for me as well.
No, surprisingly, the well, not so surprisingly actually, the Chinese numbers are lesser than their usual death
Yes,
rates,
so,
right? So
it seems like even lesser people died than what the Chinese claimed. I mean, you can imagine the kind of pressure the statistician might have been under to come up with that. So
yeah.
So it's last thing, Abhishek, is that the civil registration, which is actually, unlike all these modelings and estimates, the civil registration system, which kind of mandates all
deaths.
For 2020 seem to be like quite in tune with the historical increase.
Yes, so if you didn't know there was COVID and you looked at the data, you wouldn't really see a spike.
Correct. So in fact, in 2019, I think there were around 76 lakhs death registered, and in 2020, it was around 81, 82.
Correct.
So which is like maybe a 5% increase. Historically,
6%, yes.
10%, 8% was the previous 2 years increase. Okay, so which broadly speaking, I think our registration system of death, especially given that there is a compensation in place and we have a lot of insurance schemes now, I think
critics probably all harp on the fact that in the rural systems, rural places, apparently this does not work very well.
In fact, one could argue that the first wave was very minimal in the rural areas. In fact, it was a very urban phenomenon.
Correct.
2020, I think, seemed like, because partly attributable to the draconian lockdown and all that stuff, I think India kind of did well. So I would actually wait for a much more robust system like our CRS system for 2021.
Yes.
There is a general acknowledgement that the May was little brutal and there are certainly excess deaths and possibly, there has been undercounting actually. So I think like all these, like you said, all these World Bank reports can be weaponized by political opponents. I don't think so. Even the quality of the team that prepares it is, I'm not sure how much multidisciplinary and it has the ability to understand the uniqueness of Indian context, using one state peak debt rates to calculate for across the country, and like the same set of people who kind of celebrate quote unquote the Kerala model are okay with all these kinds, because of course different Indian states, based on the quality of the public health care, the responses were also dramatically different, right? So the one size fits all measurement itself is a very questionable way of doing it, actually. So
if you just look at like broad data, so I think in 2019 there were 75 lakh deaths, and I think India has about 2 crore births, something, right? And so like or 2 point something, and our population is increasing at 1% a year. So you could expect 6% increase in deaths, maybe 5% is due to ailments or like some surprise cause. This should kind of increase at about 1 to 2% a year. Second thing is, a lot of people, the death registry has to be done because wider insurance thing. You have everybody, even in villages, now even women have right to like the property or whatever. So transfer of title transfer has to be done, right? You also have all the crematoriums require a death certificate, and the death certificate in urban India. So I think a lot of this, India does a reasonably good job of collecting data about birth, death, demography.
So the story goes like this, right? So there is those few pictures of burning pyres in UP. So that means, India is burning the deaths without registration or anything. Exactly. Therefore, 50 lakh excess deaths, right? So that's how the dots are joined, right?
Oh, absolutely. And then, say from 80 lakh who passed away, say in 2020, if you're saying that there are 47 lakh more deaths, right?
No, so 47 lakh is for 2020 plus 21.
2020. So whatever. So 42. Like you just say that, okay, 5 lakh was their excess. So this kind of thing over 2 years, as Roshan mentioned, right? It would be visible. It would be, you would see that India's debt population hasn't grown for, say, a particular year. So those kind of things, right? And this, you could see it anecdotally. I think, see, a lot of people have their specific agendas and either like to try and make other countries look good. So make, say, probably like a poor country like India look bad, or whatever else is there, right? Or some lazy mathematical modeling and lazy extrapolation. But yes, we will see better quality data. And I think like these things, by actually talking more about it, we are giving more this to their views, right? So I think it's better just left ignored.
Yeah. No, for I think anyone who wants to understand India during COVID, how the government handled it, how the various ministries, groups, everyone came together. Definitely check out this book called Nation to Protect by Priyam Gandhi Modi. We hosted her on the podcast as well. Very, very data driven, extremely interesting take on what happened over the last couple of years. Moving on to some political news. Prashant Kishore announced that he would begin a 3,000 kilometer Padayatra from West Champaran. The political strategist announced this in a press meet before chalking out his future political plan. He would reach out to people of Bihar and also begin a 3,000 kilometer Padayatra from West Champaran. He also ruled out that he was going to launch any political party or forum as of now, simply saying that he would work towards the welfare of the people in Bihar. Prasanna, last week, there was news that Prashant Kishore actually rejected, an offer from Congress to join them, right? But what do you think? I mean, do you think his political aspirations will, take the form of a party and him becoming an active political leader as such, or do you think that he prefers being behind the scenes?
See, I think his long-term, even I would say like medium-term kind of goal would be to get embedded in the Congress party. I think broadly, I think Kishore himself and the Congress party leadership might be in agreement that he can be a part of the Congress system, but I think the modus operandi and the particular role and responsibility and how this entire engagement goes is something where I think there is some difference. So I don't think so there is a philosophical difference, or they kind of suspect him as some BJP Trojan horse or something like that, and all, which were some suggestions that have emerged. So essentially, I think it's a nitty-gritties and the engagement model is where I think the talks kind of broke down. So I would think that he'll be doing these kind of pin tricks and like this kind of stage managed, theatrics till that point of time when I think he converges with the Congress, right? Like, so, I mean, and largely speaking, I think like neither he has the kind of the stature or the social background or anything in the context of Bihar political landscape where he can essentially add any value, right? Like, I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of young people in Bihar who are disenchanted with the larger political system in Bihar because, even unlike UP, which is kind of, you like it or not, made, I would call rapid strikes. Bihar is still caught in that old, the socialist caste. I mean, it was basically the hotbed of all the Lohia socialite political experiments, right? Sometimes it's not able to just break free of that shackles, actually. And I mean, and even like, let's say, even if Jharkhand were part of that undivided Bihar state, at least with kind of industrialization happening and the kind of mineral wealth that it had, its economy could have been a little more robust. Now, even that resource-rich part of Bihar is no longer part of the state. So, simply speaking, they don't have any creative economic ideas to re-energize the state and region. I mean, I'm not blaming the current dispensation also, but even like the BJP Nitish Kumar experiment is also an smart mandal experiment, which kind of it's out-mandling the original mandalites, let me put it that way, by a more creative combination, right? But from an economic, aspirational political template, you don't really see that in Bihar, right? Like, and Bihar, young people of Bihar are like across India, and I'm sure they are also, almost, I would think like, surprisingly, that's one state where everybody across class, caste divide have a great degree of understanding of politics, actually. So I'm sure they'll be observing what's happening in the rest of the country. And when you benchmark that against what is happening in Bihar, it might be a disappointing thing. So there will be some social media amplification around how Prashant Kishore might be the messiah who would kind of, deliver the thing. But I think there's something much more, like when we talk about Bengal or Bihar, I think like there is something fundamentally more deep-rooted where you can't really blame just the political system alone, right? The political system also reflects a certain ethos of the underlying society, right? Like, and the society itself, when it shows a certain kind of lethargy, or I would say even invested in a certain kind of status quo, right? It's very difficult for even politicians or like people who are as contemporaries and some new people that we might not even like. I think currently BJP prefers campaign management and electioneering organizations which are completely under the wraps and understated. But I kind of know few people who are associated with that. They are like probably even smarter than Prashant Kishore. So it's not a unique political skill anymore, right? So additional advantage that he can bring is that he can say, okay, I have this clout in Bihar, and Bihar may Congress is anyway almost indistinguishable from the Lalu brand of politics. Though the social base of Congress is very different from the kind of politics that Lalu brings to Lalu brand of politics, right? So he might try to create that aura around himself and make him useful in more ways than once. Like, he might create a buzz about himself in Bihar and all. And he has this huge bunch of Lutyens journalists who are happy to plant his stories in the media and all that. So I think it's a part of his negotiating strategy with Congress. That's what I think mean, genuinely, there is a possibility that all the doors are shut to the Congress, but that seemed to be the case 6 months back. But again, we had another entire news cycle of where he was almost close to signing up. So I think his heart is with the Congress. It's just like how I think like Priyanka Gandhi is completely warmed up to the idea of Kishore being the kind of, the chief operating officer of Congress and strategizing. But I think Rahul Gandhi is still not on board. I think there's this thing because Rahul, I think, I don't know, like what to say of it or what to make of it. He genuinely believes that maybe Congress has to rediscover its socialist moorings and like the kind of Indira Gandhi type of politics or whatever that they have to do and not outsource political thinking to a third-party consultant, whatever. So I think that tension has to be resolved. But I think he is in it for the long run, and I would not be very surprised like maybe after the Gujarat election he would again come, because I think the 2023 elections, right, might be more prospective for Congress party. Like at least that's what they would be thinking. Like you have Karnataka in 2023 May, and then those two states where I think like Rajasthan and Chhattisgarh, right, where they would think that at least in Chhattisgarh they would think that they have a chance of retaining and all that stuff. So that's what I would think. Like you would probably see him get on board Congress in 2023. I mean, this is all completely my own theory. Okay, I'm just happy to be contradicted, or if somebody can provide a perspective, we'll be happy to.
No, I think I 100% agree. I think Prashant Kishore has been a PR phenomenon, right? Because you win an election, it's because of his awesome strategy, and you lose an election because of the leadership, right? The political leadership. And there's a heck of a difference between being a strategist and a leader, right? I mean, so it's a totally different ball game. I personally feel he's probably, as you said, he's angling for that Manmohan Singh-ish type of a post or a nomination with the Congress, right?
Like, I think after Ahmad Patel passed away, Meera would be probably knowing since. I mean, he was this complete backroom operations political manager of the Congress party, including like little old-fashioned in the sense, keeping with how Congress itself regressed in terms of its overall politics and strategizing and all that. But he was quite powerful. Like I think, like he could pretty much, of course, with the blessings of the Gandhis, he could pretty much dismiss any CM, foist any CM and all. He was like the political money bag as well, plus strategist, but very understated and like away from the limelight, right? Like so, the only thing with Kishore would be the discomfort is that I think there is a vacuum for that kind of a role. But only thing is that I think like Kishore seems to have, seem to be like a guy with at least, though if you really look at his interviews carefully, he always puts this modest thing. And in fact, what you just told Roshan, he himself says that I have never claimed credit and all that. No, of course, I think that's a part of the pretense that he puts on. But yeah. I think that the political class might be wary of a person who they kind of, I don't think so, they suspect his loyalty or something because he once worked with Prime Minister Modi. I think like he's completely, in my understanding, kind of estranged from that system. But I think like the visibility and this independent, not the political strength, but the kind of media power that he has and all that would be something that a regular politician will fear. I mean, especially when he's a part of the political system. If he was a consultant, that's a great thing that they would have enjoyed because he can help them plan this PRs or build up a particular political. All that was fine, but when he wants to be the part of the system itself, like you said, right? Difference between being a management consultant and a CEO or a COO within the organization. Right? There are like two different roles, right? So the trust factor would be very different. So that's my feeling, I guess.
Well, all right. To round things off, the Indian UN envoy's response to a Dutch diplomat had set Twitter abuzz yesterday. A tweet by Carol Vaughan Oostrom, ambassador of the Netherlands to the UK, advising India to quote, respect the UN Charter and not abstain in the General Assembly, went viral last week. In response, India's permanent representative to the United Nations, Mr. T.S. Tirumurthy, replied, kindly don't patronize us, Ambassador, we know what to do. The Dutch ambassador then deleted his tweet after this stinging response. Nirav, it seems like Dr. Jaishankar has set the tone for how we must respond diplomatically, and others are now following suit.
Yeah, so actually, see, to be fair, Europe, all of the European leaders, they are caught in like this very big shock. They are too dependent on Russian oil and gas. They built like pipelines, etc. They were planning another pipeline, which has been shelved for now. And they have kind of put partial sanctions on Russia, where they continue to buy oil and gas, right, as usual. And in fact, they've been buying more because they're trying to stockpile for the winter. So they are a bit shell-shocked. Two is a lot of European countries still don't realize how big India has become and how much India has its own spine, right? So India always non-aligned. India was non-aligned after being ruled by colonial powers. Joining any one camp would be giving up its sovereignty. See, that was what the thought process was. Maybe we chose a little more socialist path, thinking that was appropriate for India at that time. Whatever, I kind of disagree with it, but it is what it is. And it coincidentally so happened that economically, Western Europe and USA did a lot better than Eastern Europe and Russia. But that wasn't like so much set in stone when India was online. Two is, now India is the world's 5th or 6th. Now it'll like biggest economy. It's bigger than Netherlands. It is equal to like Britain and a little bit ahead of France, right? So India is a big enough economy. India has its own spine, and India will be voting for India's interests, right? So it is a tricky balancing act. You think about it, Jaishankar said it, that Europe buys more in an afternoon than whatever oil India has bought, and India has been getting $30 a barrel discount for even the small amount that we are buying. So I think it's this is the time where people realize that India is not a country which can be told to do this or that, right? We vote on our own interests and we know what to do. So we don't need any moralistic kind of judgment, and we don't tell them how to vote in other things, right? We are not telling them on issues on which are frequently brought on to the UN, say about like Kashmir or say about our border disputes with China. We are not instructing them how to vote. So we don't expect to be instructed how we should be voting. So I think it's good. India is showing a spine. Obviously, as you mentioned, Dr. Jaishankar effect is there, but it's also, I would say, a little bit about political leadership. It is about confidence in our own economy. We've gone on from being a country which was receiving aid to which is actually supplying out things to people. We are like kind of becoming more resilient and Atmanirbhar. So even for vaccines, think about, had this happened in 70s or 80s, we would get vaccination last 2 years after the rest of the world is vaccinated, right? With any leftovers. So I think all of these things, India is self-confident, and exactly, like we don't tell them how to run their political affairs. So we don't expect any comment on what we should do as well.
Yeah. All right. So that brings us to the end of the Bharatvaarta Weekly today. We have some very interesting episodes coming up. We have a live stream with the former Prime Minister of Finland, Mr. Alexander Stuff, scheduled for the 20th. This is part of our Velina's Talk series with Velina Chakarova. We have another episode upcoming on India's space research program. I'm talking to a couple of scientists to understand the latest developments. And finally, we also have an episode with the author, Wing Commander Vijay Chatur, who has written a book called Vijay Patra, which is a translation of the Zafarnama, a letter sent by Sri Guru Gobind Singh in 1705 to Emperor Aurangzeb. This was hosted by Ami Ganatra. So plenty of interesting content lined up. Do stay tuned, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Bharatvaarta podcast. If you want to see more content like this, then don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We started Bharatvaarta to facilitate long-form discussions on politics, policy, and culture. We don't necessarily endorse anything that was said in this episode. If you wish to offer us feedback, do reach out to us on social media